In this lesson, we'll be creating the pieces of the pie graph. Okay, so in between our lessons and earlier in our last section where we were doing the line graph, I went ahead and repeated a few of the steps, just like extruding some of the text that was really easy to do and getting all of their axes in the way. Things that for you are just kind of busy work. I want to show you new things. So with that in mind, we've got a few different pieces here, just like the sweeps, which we've also already gone over, just for the lines kind of pointing to different parts of the graphs. But we've never addressed the fact that when the splines came over, the 43% and the graph were one piece, as well as the 54. And also, how are we going to show this and move along with the way that this has been cut? So I think there's a way better way to do it than trying to work with the splines for the circle part of the pie graph that are already here. I think we can do this better with a cylinder primitive. So let's go ahead and start that process. I'm going to middle click to go into my front view, and we'll come up here to our primitives and let's add a cylinder. Okay, and then we need to choose the way that this cylinder is going to be looking at us. So if I come into my object, you can see it's oriented right now in the Y plus. So I want to change it to the Z plus, so you can see that the circle is facing me now. And then we can increase the radius to match up with our pie. And then we're going to go into a new tab you may have never used before, and that is the Slice tab. And if I check this on, it's going to allow me to just use a part of this and then edit the way that this is broken up. So this is extremely helpful when you want to make something like a pie chart and you want to have something kind of swoop on like this. So what we can do is I'm going to start this out by kind of saying from being the topmost place. And all I have to do really is pull this in so that it's lining up with, as close as possible at least, with this line here. And I actually think we may want to go in and make our radius very slightly bigger. There we go, 73. Then I'll just do the same thing, still on that Slice tab, for that 2 option. So that's going to be to right about there. And looks like that's at about 102. From negative 90 to 102 is what the 54% looks like. So let's go ahead and we'll just rename that from cylinder to 54%. Okay, then what I want to do is duplicate that by control dragging it down, and we'll call this next one our 2% because that's what comes next if we're just going clockwise. So I'll do 2% for the name of that one, and then I'll come down here and we'll edit its values. So we know that it's going to go a little bit farther, so I can increase that 2. And then we also know that we need to bring this around, so we're turning up that from. Now I'd rather have these overlap rather than have a gap. So it looks like if I put that right in there at 102 and the other one is ending at 102, that'll be perfect. So we have 102 for where it's from all the way to 110. So then let's go ahead and control drag that down to duplicate it, and the next one is going to be our 43%. So we can rename that to 43%, and we know that that one went to 110. So let's see what happens if we take our from to that same point at 110, and then we take our 2 on around to where that 1% slice will begin. And that looks pretty close. I'll leave a little bit of extra room, and if it's slightly rotated backwards, that's okay. Great, so now we've got our last one, and that one is going to be our 1%. And we know that 43 went to 266. So let's put 266 in as our from, and then we'll increase our 2. And we know that 54 started at negative 90, but I don't think that's going to work for this one because we're not going all the way back around, and it doesn't force us to work in 360 degrees and then start over. It does allow us to have those negative values. So it looks like right in there at 270, we're lining up nicely. Okay, so with all of those pieces created, now we can middle click and come back out here, and you can see that we have our pie chart. It's a little bit thicker than we really need it to be, so we can just select all of those, go back over to our object, and pull down this height. Let's do something in the range of 30 or 40 for the thickness. And then what we will want to do is add some textures to this. And then we also need to extract the parts of our original splines that have our numbers in them by going back into our front view and deleting the outside parts of those originals. So now that these are in place, we like them, we like the way they look, we can get rid of those original measurements we had. So what I'll do is we'll turn off their visibility for the new pieces. Now we're only working with the old ones. We don't even need this part anymore, so I can select that and delete it. And then just by selecting 54, I'll just go into vertex mode, or excuse me, point mode, and we'll grab our live selection and just select all the points that are on that circle and delete them. Perfect. Then I'll come into 43 and do the same. Great. So now we have 43 and 54 actually just being the text. And if you want to, you could even duplicate one of your little pieces like this, open it up. And actually, that's a sweep. We don't want that one. We want one of our extrusions. So I'll grab that one, control drag it down. We'll call this one 43%. We'll go into that extrusion, and we want to get rid of the original spline that was in there. So we'll just select it and delete it, then drop 43 underneath there. And by doing it this way, now when we go back out to our perspective view, it's going to have the right kind of extrusion on it. Now we're still in point mode, so I'll go back out to model mode, and you can see, perfect. So then I'll just duplicate that same process for our 54%. We'll rename that to 54%. Get rid of the original spline, drop the new one in there, and now we have our nice 54%. Now we may want to go in there and actually pump that extrusion up a little bit later, but now we're at a much better place than we were before. So the last thing that's left to do is to actually move the anchor point or the axis into position for both 43 and 54, since we were borrowing off that original 2%. Okay, that looks great. So we can play a little bit more with how deep those are if we need to change that later, but for now, we're well on our way to creating our pie graph. We can turn back on those pieces. Even though our text is going inside there, we know it still exists. And what we'll be doing in our next lesson is actually starting to animate those pieces of the pie to kind of reveal on. So we got our measurements for our slice, but now we want to key them. So stick around and we'll be doing that in the next lesson.